Before anyone believed it, the woman the whole village avoided would marry the bricklayer with quiet eyes, and together they would raise the largest store in the region. People later would point to the walls and the roof and say it was luck, or say it was charity, or say it was a miracle. But they never paid attention to how it truly began. Because this story is not about the store standing high at the crossroads. It is about the way they built it, slow, steady, brick by brick. And how the very first brick was not made of clay. It was a simple word, a clean gaze, a small act that nobody else noticed. In the village, they called her dead weight. The women whispered behind baskets of fruit. The young men laughed from the shade. Even her own aunts rolled their eyes and made sharp jokes at family gatherings. They said she was the kind of woman who would die alone, a shadow passing by, a body too big for anyone to want. They looked at her and did not see a person. They saw a floor. They saw a burden. They saw a shape they could step around without saying, "Excuse me." To them, Maria was a silence that took up space. But there was one man who did not look away. A bricklayer with calloused palms, sun-browned shoulders, and few words. He did not see excess when he looked at her. He saw a person standing there. He saw hands that worked. He saw eyes that did not ask for pity. While the village giggled and said it must be pity or charity, these two began, very quietly, to build something no one understood. Not a store yet. Not a house. Something softer and more solid at the same time. Respect. Trust. A path that 2 feet could walk together. This story is not about the storefront they would one day raise above the market road. It is about how they laid its foundations in the middle of a noisy world that expected her to stay small and silent. And it all began with the first brick. A compliment spoken in passing, so gentle that the market wind almost carried it away, but strong enough to change everything for the woman who heard it. It happened on a hot Tuesday morning when the air sat heavy in the chest and the sun stuck to the skin. Maria went down to the market wearing a new dress. Not new from a store, but new from herself. She had sewn it at night by the light of a kerosene lamp, between one wave of sadness and another, between a sigh and a prayer. She took old fabric she had saved at the bottom of a trunk, spread it over the table, and cut it carefully. She measured the pieces with a tape that had lost its numbers in some places from years of use. She stitched each seam like she was tying hope to the thread. When she finished, she held it up and saw that it was deep blue like the sky before a storm, with small white stitches along the bodice and sleeves, neat and steady. It was not fancy, but it was hers. After years sewing clothes for other people and hearing that a body like hers did not fit anything beautiful, she did not expect praise. She never did. She left her house with her head lowered, a bag of flour on one shoulder and a courage disguised as routine. She stepped between the stalls as if walking on glass, careful, braced for the hurt that might come with each laugh drifting by. Each step carried a memory of someone's cruel word. Each shout from a seller felt like it could swing her way and point. She was almost past the cassava stall when she saw him, Aiko, the bricklayer, loading bags of sand into his cart, his arms steady, his forehead shining, his mouth set in a line of work. She looked away, ready for the usual silence, the usual pretend not to see. But he spoke. "That dress," he said, voice simple as water. "It's beautiful." Maria stopped without meaning to. She glanced around, unsure he was talking to her. No one else stood nearby. He nodded toward the dress. "Did you make it yourself?" She nodded slowly, not because she lacked words, but because no one had ever thought to say something kind about how she looked. No man had ever noticed what she wore, not even to be polite, not to ask where it came from, not to ask if her hands had made it. Aiko's eyes went to the seams, then to her face. "Good stitching," he said. "Firm thread. Looks like the dress of a woman who knows what she wants." That was all. 3 simple lines laid carefully, like he laid bricks. Level, true, and without show. But inside Maria the sound struck like thunder in a dry sky. She nodded again and moved on as if nothing had happened. But her hands trembled as she held the flower. The path home seemed longer and lighter at the same time. When she stepped inside, she let the bag drop to the dirt floor, sat on the low stool by the window and cried. Cried in a way she had not let herself in years. Not from sadness, from surprise, from relief, from being seen without being cut. For the first time a man had not looked at her body as if it were wrong. He had looked at what she made. He had looked at her skill, at her care, at her presence. He had seen beauty where the others only saw numbers and edges. That day the blue dress became armor. Not because it blocked the stones. No, the comments still came, sharp and mean, like little knives tossed at her back. But because now, deep in her chest, there lived another kind of memory. A clean gaze, a true compliment. A moment that nobody could erase. In the days that followed, Maria went to the market with steps that touched the ground with more weight and less fear. The stairs did not stop. The old whispers did not end. She still felt the invisible stones thrown by other people's eyes, but her body did not bend like it used to. She carried herself as someone who knew she could be seen in another way. Not as a body outside a standard, not as a woman nobody wanted, but as a maker, as someone with steady hands and a clear mind, as someone who, yes, knew what she wanted. Aiko stayed the same. He did not chase her down alleys. He did not flood her with words. He did not hand out daily praise like cheap candy. He just kept showing up, the way work shows up each morning. When he crossed her path, he said, "Good morning," with the same calm as the last time. If she needed a hand with a sack too heavy for one person, he lifted one end and said nothing else. He did not crowd. He did not pull. He did not push. His manner said he did not need to prove anything. It felt somehow like he already knew they would build something together one day, even if they had not yet named it. The townspeople did not notice. How could they? They were busy keeping to their own stories. To them, he was still only the quiet bricklayer with dirt under his nails and strength in his shoulders. She was still only the fat woman in a blue dress that did not ask anyone's permission to exist. But hidden inside that small, forgotten compliment lay the first brick of a construction that would change everything, because it was the first look that saw beyond the body, and sometimes that is all it takes for a life to begin to turn. Nights in the village can be heavy when the heat does not lift. On one such night, the kind where the crickets sing too loudly and the moon seems to peer into houses through the cracks in the windows, Maria decided to tell her mother she had been speaking with Aiko. It was not courting. It was not a secret romance. It was just talk. Few words traded between one job and the next, between her trip to the water pump and his return from a dusty site. But she wanted to share it with someone. And though old wounds covered much of her heart, she still believed her mother was the safest harbor she knew. Dona Zulmira had a face shaped by hard years, and eyes that watched the world with care and doubt. She had lived through abandonments that came like storms, always sudden, always cold. She had raised her children alone, with her own hands and not enough money, and in taking blow after blow from life, she had learned to expect the worst. She distrusted everything that arrived too sweet, smiles that lasted too long, gifts that came out of season, words from men that sounded like songs. She used to say nothing in this world is free, least of all affection. Maria sat by the hammock with a bowl of beans to shell. She tried to sound light, as if she were commenting on the weather, not opening a door to her heart. By coincidence, she said. I met Aiko on the road today. He helped me with a heavy bag. We talked a little. Zulmira did not lift her eyes. She kept stirring the cornmeal in the pot with a wooden spoon, slow circles, steady circles, as if nothing had been said. The steam rose and curled and fell. He's a good bricklayer, Maria added gently. There was only the scrape of the spoon on the bottom of the pot. A quiet, rough sound. Then Zulmira spoke, voice even, face turned to the flame. A man who gets close to a woman alone, she said, especially one your size, is looking to take advantage. The words hit Maria like stones against the chest. Not because of their harshness, she had heard worse from strangers at the market, but because they came from her mother's mouth. The worst part was not the judgment of the bricklayer. It was the hidden message laid like a trap on the floor, that she, being who she was, did not deserve to be loved, that any affection toward a woman like her could only be a trick. Maria tried to smile as if the words had not cut, but the hand that held the beans started to shake. He didn't ask for anything, Mother, she said softly. Not to come in, not to sit, not for food. He just treated me with respect. Zulmira set down the spoon and turned to her daughter, eyes firm. Respect is what they show at the start, she said. Then come the requests, then the touches, then the disappearances. I've seen it before, Maria. She shook her head once, as if closing a door. A bricklayer is a man with quick hands and an uncertain future. Today he's here. Tomorrow he takes a job in another town and leaves you with a belly and shame. The kitchen went into a deep quiet. Only the soft hiss of the cornmeal cooking broke the heavy air. Maria looked down. The beans felt like stones in her lap. When she spoke, it was not with anger or shouting. It was with the calm of someone who has been pushed to the ground many times but still chooses to stand. I'd rather have calloused hands, she said, than the fake smiles of the others. Zulmira scoffed, a small, tired sound, as if she were done teaching lessons no one wanted to learn. She picked up the spoon again and turned back to the pot. She said nothing else. Maria went on shelling the beans with more resolve, though her eyes were bright with unshed tears. That night, Sleep did not find her early. She lay on her back and watched the lines in the wooden ceiling, thinking how many times she had been told no man would stay. How many times she had been told her body was a burden, her mouth too big, her laugh too loud, that she was meant to serve, not to be loved. And now that someone had treated her with care, the world rushed in to say it must be a trap. But there was something different in Aiko's way. It was not only that his gaze was clean. It was the absence of pressure, the absence of hurry. The way he spoke, calm and low, as if he listened more than he talked. It was his silence, most of all, a silence that did not judge, did not want to take, did not demand anything at all. Maria knew her mother did not speak from cruelty. She spoke from fear, from having loved badly once and paying for it hard, from having trusted too much, too fast, and being left with empty hands. But deep down, Maria felt her story did not need to follow that same script. She could write another ending. She could lay another kind of brick. The next morning, the sun rose heavy and bright. Maria put on the blue dress again, not to provoke talk, not to challenge anyone, but to remind herself of who she could be. A woman with dreams that fit her exactly, a woman who could make with her hands what she wanted to wear. She walked to the market with a quiet resolve that felt new and old at the same time. When she saw Aiko near the warehouse, moving stacks of tile from the ground to a wagon, he looked up and smiled a little. He did not step close. He did not change his voice. He simply asked, "Do you sew for others?" The question reached her like cool water. She smiled, an honest, surprised smile, because inside that simple question was everything she needed to hear. He did not want to enter her house without being asked. He did not want to take her time for free. He wanted to add to her day. He wanted to pay for her work. He wanted to build something with what she could do, without either of them noticing. They were already laying the first rows of a building no one believed possible. Not a palace made of promises that cost nothing. Not a love shouted loud in the square. A simple love, without cheap words, raised on a base made of respect and faith and daily effort. Maria's joy began like a breeze at the edge of a long winter. Small, almost nothing. But anyone who has lived in the cold of contempt for a long time can feel even the lightest breath of kindness as an early spring. She tucked that feeling into the same place where she kept the memory of his first compliment. She fed it with patience and care. She watered it with time. She guarded it from people's eyes the way you shade a new seedling from harsh noon sun. She learned to smile to herself when she threaded a needle. She stood straighter without asking permission. She spoke a little more in the market and flinched a little less. And when Aiko passed by and said, "Good morning," that was all she needed. A small brick set with steady hands, a line kept straight, a wall a little higher than before. The village still gossiped. It still pointed. It still measured her with the wrong ruler. But brick by brick, Maria began to measure herself by a different standard. By what she made, by what she kept, by what she gave. She did not explain herself to those who did not want to understand. She learned to save her words for those who listened. There would be more nights of doubt. There would be more talks with her mother that felt like walking barefoot over stones. There would be work to do, more than she had ever done, and some days would be bitter again. But there would also be mornings when the blue dress caught the light just right and reminded her that courage can be stitched, that hope can be hemmed, that beauty can be chosen. The store would come much later. The walls, the doors, the shelves lined with goods people needed. But long before that, the two of them had already started their truest building. And every time he asked another practical question, what thread she preferred, how much fabric she needed, whether she had time for a new order, she felt the ground under her feet get a little more firm. In the quiet that follows a day of work, sitting beside her window with a needle in hand, she understood something she had not understood before. Respect is a love that arrives early and leaves last. It is not loud. It is not shiny. It is a hand that does its job, a voice that keeps its promise. A gaze that sees the person, and not the noise around the person. And she wanted that more than anything the village could give or take away, so she kept sewing. He kept laying bricks. Between thread and mortar, between cloth and clay, they learned each other's pace, and though the world around them did not change its mind yet, something inside her had changed completely. It was enough to keep going. She didn't talk much about Aiko. There was no declared courtship, no vows exchanged under the moon. But it was enough to see them sitting under the shade of the cashew tree, sharing a roasted corn in a cup to know that something was taking root there, and in the village where other people's lives are the main dish. Nothing grows in silence without being spied on. The first to whisper with the neighbors from the street up the hill, women who had long forgotten what it was like to be looked at with tenderness. They said Maria was using tricks, that she was hooking the man through his stomach, that with enough couscous and sweet corn porridge, even a rock could get itself a husband. And they laughed loud enough for her to hear, but not enough to own their poison. They laughed while passing by her house, while gossiping at the market, while crossing paths with Aiko and pretending not to understand what he saw in her. The men didn't spare them either. They muttered between sips that Aiko was losing his mind, that with so many slim women around, he had to go and get tangled up with a fat seamstress. Some mocked him openly, calling him the heavyweight bricklayer, as if loving a woman outside the norm was something to joke about. Aiko, however, remained unshaken. He didn't retaliate, didn't answer back, didn't run away. When provoked, he would simply look up and say, "While they talk, we're raising our walls." And that phrase became a wall between them and the rest of the world, because that's exactly what they were doing. Brick by brick, building a space where the gaze was clean. The touch was gentle, and love didn't depend on measurements or anyone's approval, and that disturbed people. It disturbed them more than any scandal could. The village, used to seeing Maria as a background figure, couldn't stand watching her bloom, especially with a good man by her side. It was as if her happiness were an affront, as if her existence was only acceptable when she was small, sad, alone. When they started appearing together at the market, him carrying the bags, her holding his hand, naturally the world seemed to stop for a second. Sideways glances, forced smiles, a brief silence followed by malicious remarks. "She must have done some witchcraft," said an older woman, shaking her head as if lamenting a tragedy. "Or he just feels sorry for her." "Poor thing," replied another, poking through a bucket of fish as if stirring up old wounds. Maria heard it all. She wasn't deaf nor naive. She knew that for many there, happiness was only allowed for the slim, the young, the discreet. But there was something in her that changed with each passing day. It wasn't pride nor arrogance. It was certainty. Certainty that true love doesn't ask permission from judgment, and that for the first time she didn't have to beg for affection. It came to her. Even so, there were hard days. Days when the words hit harder, when the laughter cut deeper. Mornings when she thought of retreating, of returning to the comfortable invisibility. But all it took was remembering Isio's gaze, the firmness with which he held her hand, the respectful silence he offered when she needed to break down, and she would stand back up. One such morning, as she left to buy flour, a woman looked her up and down and muttered, "Looks like you think you're somebody now." Parading around with a man like a queen. Maria stopped. She looked the woman in the eye, not with anger, but with the serenity of someone who knows who she is. "I'm no queen, but I'm loved with truth, and that not everyone has." The woman fell silent, and Maria walked on because the village could talk, mock, invent, but it was already too late. The building had begun, and no gossip in the world could tear down what was being raised on the ground of respect, courage, and love. The proposal didn't come with flowers, candles, or a man on one knee. It happened on a hot afternoon under a mango tree while Maria mended a torn hammock, and Aiko was trimming wood for a new chicken coop. "Have you ever thought about getting married?" he asked with the same ease as if he were wondering whether it would rain before the day was over. Maria paused her stitching. She looked at him without laughing, without blushing. She simply let the silence say that yes, she thought about it every day, but had never had the courage to wish it out loud. "A big party is not possible," he said. "But truth that we have," she nodded, and that nod was firmer than any shouted yes at an altar. It was the beginning of something that didn't need witnesses to be sacred. In the village, weddings had always been grand events. When it was slim, young women, daughters of well-known families, there was music, big pots of food, colorful ribbons, and dancing until dawn. But for Maria and Aiko, there was no procession, no lace dress, no guests from afar. And even so, it was the most sincere wedding that soil had ever seen. On the morning of the union, Maria woke before sunrise. She put on the cleanest clothes she had, tied a light scarf over her hair, and dabbed her wrists with lavender leaves, just as her grandmother he used to do on prayer days. Aiko showed up in a pressed shirt and shoes polished with candle wax. In his pocket, he carried a simple brass ring bought at the second-hand market, but it gleamed like gold in the palm of his calloused hand. They walked together to the home of the village elder, Senor Babajiji, a man of faith and respect, who for years had blessed marriages with more weight than any judge. He welcomed them from his porch with deep-set eyes and a voice that trembled slightly. "A marriage that begins with truth. No gossip can destroy." The words hung in the air as if time itself had stopped to listen. When it came time for the blessing, the elder placed his hands on their heads, asked them to look into each other's eyes, and promised not wealth nor a big house, nor abundance, but respect, patience, and truth. And that's what they did. No music, no witnesses, no crowd, only the three of them. and the soft breeze that crossed the yard like an invisible guest. After the prayer, they sat together to share a plate of yams with oil, which Maria had prepared with care. They ate in silence but with light smiles, and there, in that unpretentious simplicity, lay the purest of sacraments. When they returned home, Maria was met with sideways glances from neighbors whispering behind doors. Some laughed at the lack of a party, a dress, or a bouquet. Others murmured that it was shameful, that it wasn't even a real wedding. But she wasn't shaken because that day, for the first time, she felt whole. Not from others' approval, but from ICO's steady gaze and the respectful way he held her hand. Zulra, her mother, hadn't attended. She said she couldn't bless what she didn't understand. She stayed home, sitting on the doorstep, feigning indifference. But later that night, while Maria was washing dishes in the basin and Aiko was hammering a hook into the wall, she appeared at the door with a pot of corn porridge. "I warmed it for you, too. It's what you offer to those starting something." She handed them the pot and left. No hugs, no sweet words, but Maria understood. In her own way, her mother was saying she was beginning to accept, and that was enough. That night, lying in hammocks side by side, with the windows open to the starry sky, Maria and Aiko slept like those who have built a home with their own hands. There was no big house yet, no plastered walls, no store up and running, but there was faith. And where there is faith, the ground becomes a foundation. Their wedding was not spoken of at the village parties, nor turned into a framed photo, but in time it would become the root of something bigger than anyone there could have imagined, because it was on that day, without cake or guests, that Maria realized what truly matters is being blessed by someone who sees your soul, not by those who measure your worth by your body or your bank account. A few months after the wedding, when the villagers' whispers seemed finally tired of mocking, and the couple's routine had settled between sewing work and small construction jobs, Aiko received news of an inheritance. It wasn't money nor a house. It was a dry plot of land, more dust than soil, a piece of ground left to him by his father, a hard man who had barely spoken to his son, but who before dying handed over that lot as one might give the scraps of a plate to someone starving. It lay far from the center of the village with sparse scrub, scattered stones, and a nearly rotten wooden fence. No one wanted anything to do with it, not for planting, not for building. The villager said the land was cursed by abandonment. No man's land, good for nothing. Aiko, as always, didn't complain. He took the key to the fallen gate, walked there with the calm of someone used to carrying life's weight on his shoulders, and stood still, staring at the nothing before him. Maria came along, silent, just holding his hand as she always did when the world seemed bigger than the two of them. "At least it's ours," he said, kicking a stone on the cracked ground. Maria didn't answer. She let go of his hand and started walking. She scanned the dry bushes, measured the distance between shadows with her steps, crouched near a twisted root, and stayed there for a few minutes without a word. Aiko watched her without understanding, but without interrupting either. He knew that look, the same one she had before. Cutting fabric, narrowed eyes, lowered brow, as if she could see beyond what was in front of her. "This will be our shop," she said at last, with the certainty of someone who could already see the future drawn into the clay. Aiko frowned. "Shop," she nodded. "A real shop, not just to sell things but to welcome people. For sewing, for corn, for soap, for fresh bread, for anyone who wants to buy without being looked down on." He laughed, a small shy laugh. "Here you can barely plant cassava here, but you can plant hope," she answered without hesitation. That was the moment it all began again. Until then they had been building love. Now they were starting to build a future. And as always, the village mocked when they heard the couple was trying to start a business in that cursed pit. They called it madness. Said Maria was filling Aiko's head with too many ideas. That people like them should be content with little, with whatever life gives. But Maria was not a woman to take life's leftovers. She was a daughter of pain, but a sister too, courage. And if she saw in that lot something no one else could, it was because her eyes had already crossed deserts far greater. In the days that followed, Aiko began clearing the land. He pulled weeds with a hoe, removed debris, stacked stones, dug with his hands when the hoe failed. Maria brought water, food, and helped when she could, tying wooden beams, organizing crates, sketching the first shop plans in an old-school notebook. Everything was improvised, everything small, but everything done with dignity. At night, lying in their hammocks, they whispered about what they would sell. Boiled corn and banana leaves, custom sewing, handmade soap, bread she had learned to make from her grandmother, and above all, a different kind of service. No mockery, no rush, with respect. Because more than products, Maria wanted to offer welcome. The village laughed. Some passed by just toe peek and laugh at the crooked walls. the dirt floor, the shelves that existed only in her mind. They said, a poor man's shop built from leftovers won't last. But what they called leftovers, Maria called seeds, because to her nothing was waste. What the world threw away she transformed. One afternoon, as she painted one of the front boards, a child came up and asked, "Auntie, what's this going to be?" Maria smiled and replied, "This is going to be the place where no one leaves empty-handed." The boy laughed, not understanding, and ran off, but the phrase stayed. And one day, it would be the shop's name on that dry ground where no one wanted to plant. Dream walls were beginning to rise. There wasn't enough cement, nor modern tools. But there was faith, and faith, when joined with hard work and true love, can raise even a palace where the world sees only ruin. Risk. There was no funding, no sponsor, no bank loan, only a cleared plot of land, a few borrowed tools, goodwill, and whatever was left over from the jobs Aiko did for others. It was common for him to come home with crooked scraps of wood, hardened lumps of cement, bent nails, cracked tiles, and Maria, with her gift for turning what the world called trash into treasure, saw use in everything. The shop began like that, a dream stitched together among rubble. The first shelves were built from old crates brought from the market, banana boxes, tomato boxes, dried fish boxes, all scrubbed with ash soap, dried in the sun, and nailed to the clay wall with a worn hammer. Aiko said it was risky that they might collapse, but Maria would pad the edges with folded cloth, line them up with a makeshift wooden ruler, and smile. It doesn't need to be pretty, it needs to be firm. That's how the first shop corners appeared. One section with soap wrapped in newspaper, another with corn in braided sacks. Farther along, rows of thread, fabric, and ribbons arranged by color. Maria sewed at night while Aiko slept, making sure the shelves were full the next morning. They also sold couscous, bean fritters, and coffee brewed in a cloth strainer. Everything simple, everything homemade, but everything tasting of K-Dot at first. Few people came in. Most passed by just to look and laugh. Some of the village women said, "A shop for people without schooling. No name, no sign. Looks more like a junk shed than a business." But anyone who stepped inside saw otherwise. There was no luxury, but there was order. No refrigeration, but there was cleanliness. And above all, there was respect. Maria made a point of serving each person as if they were the only one. She called them by name, asked about their families, offered coffee, even when there was no purchase. Aiko kept the place sturdy, replacing tiles, reinforcing shelves, building each detail as if he were raising a temple. And little by little, the impossible began to happen. First, a woman who had always shopped at the store up the street decided to try Maria's couscous, said it was the best she'd eaten since her mother died. Then came a man in debt, whom no one else would sell to on credit. He arrived hat in hand asking for soap. Maria looked him in the eye and said, "Here, no one leaves empty-handed." She gave him the soap, didn't charge him then, but wrote it down in a blue notebook in careful script, because credit wasn't charity, it was trust. Soon more people came. Simple folk, people forgotten by the bigger shops, people who preferred to pay less but be treated with dignity. And the shop began to fill, not just with products, but with life. Children came for fresh bread before school. Women sat on the wooden bench to unburden themselves between purchases. Men left their change behind like making a promise. And the miracle took root there in every corner of an old crate, because it was more than sales, it was shelter. But envy, that bitter neighbor of another's success, grew as well. Some claimed Maria used strong prayers to draw customers, that the coffee was bewitched, that Aiko must be in debt so deep he accepted such humiliation. She heard it, always heard it, but never answered back. She had already learned that the best reply was to keep growing. And they did grow, shelf by shelf, brick by brick, day after day. The shop that had barely stood at first now had eucalyptus beams, a small awning out front, and even a hand-painted sign with crooked letters, but full of truth. Maria's house, where no one leaves empty-handed. And it was in that place, built with leftovers, sweat, and hope, that people began to find not just goods, but comfort. Because sometimes all someone needs is to step into a place with no luxury, but with respect. And there, among old crates and sincere smiles, Maria and Aiko proved that when love finds purpose, it becomes a pillar and it holds up what no one believed could stand. As soon as the shop began to find its footing with steady movement, and the smell of fresh cake at the door, the eyes of the neighborhood, once filled with disdain, began to narrow with something else. Envy. But not just any envy. The kind that's born when someone who was once despised starts to bloom in front of those who always thought themselves superior. And among the many eyes watching Maria and I's every step, one burned more than theirest. Adelia Epps, the wife of the shopkeeper from the upper street. Adelia was known for having everything a woman in the village's eyes should have. A big house with a veranda, fine dresses brought from the city, necklaces that jingled when she walked, and a husband who spoke loudly in the market as if giving orders. But what no one saw or pretended not to see was the silence between them. A heavy, cutting silence. A marriage of appearances, where touch was absent and respect was rare. Adelia smiled with her lips, but her eyes hadn't laughed in a long time. When Maria's shop began to draw customers, Adelia started making loud remarks at the market. Always within earshot of curious listeners. Real beauty is when a man buys a shop for his wife, not this nonsense of a woman killing herself, working to build something with a bricklayer. The words came coated in sarcasm, like mud flung to dim someone else's shine. Some laughed, agreed, and fed the poison. But there were also those who began to notice the difference, because despite Adelia's linen dress, it was Maria whom people trusted. And even more, it was in the fat woman and the bricklayer shop that people were treated well. Adelia's husband, Ovaldo, sometimes passed in front of Maria's house with a look of disgust. Once seeing a line at the door, he spat on the ground and muttered, "That woman's getting too full of herself." But neither Adelia nor Osaldo could explain why their shop with polished shelves and a marble counter was always empty of soul, while Maria's with old crates and a dirt floor was full of people, conversation, and welcome. What hurt Ia wasn't the shop itself. It was what it symbolized. It was seeing Maria being loved, respected, valued. It was seeing Iko, a simple man but present, raising walls beside his wife, sharing the fatigue, smiling at her with his eyes. Something Ovaldo hadn't done in years. And no matter how hard she tried to hide it, Adelia S&V came from a longing she herself couldn't name. The longing to be looked at with tenderness. One afternoon, Adelia stepped into the shop for the first time. Her steps were stiff, her eyes haughty. She asked for half a kilo of soap as if doing a favor. Maria served her like anyone else. With a discreet smile, she took the soap, weighed it on the plate scale, tied it up in a bag, and handed it over with both hands. "You want me to put it on the tab, or do you want to pay now?" Adelia asked in a challenging tone. "However you prefer," Maria replied calmly. Adelia pulled a note from her pocket and tossed it onto the counter. "I only bought it because the other shop ran out." Maria took the money, thanked her with the same serenity, and gave the change without altering her tone. No irony, no retort, just dignity, and that more than any comeback stung. In the days that followed, Adelia began walking more slowly past the shop. Sometimes she stopped, pretending to look at the sidewalk, but her eyes were always turned inward, as if trying to understand what was missing in her own home. It was a child who without meaning to spoke the truth everyone felt. Leaving the shop with a little cake in hand, the boy said loudly to his mother, "Mommy, this place is better than the other shop. It smells like Grandma's house." The phrase spread through the village like wind in dry grass. And that was it. Maria's shop had what no other had soul. It was made of struggle, of care, of presence. It was the result of true love, the kind that builds together, listens, and respects. Adelia had everything money could buy, but what Maria had, no gold in the village could bring. A partner who saw beyond her body, a space where she was called by name, and a people who little by little were beginning to see her as more than they had ever dared to admit. And so brick by brick, Maria wasn't just building a shop. She was building a place where love, respect, and humility were worth more than any polished display, and for someone who had always been ignored, that was the most beautiful victory of all. It was a Friday morning, and the heat was already clinging to the skin before the sun reached the tops of the houses. Ika was working at the side of the shop, expanding a small area in the back, where Maria planned to set up a kitchen to bake cakes and bread on site. Ever since business had grown, she dreamed of selling everything fresh, warm, fragrant, the kind of smell that reaches the soul before it ever touches the stomach. And Iko, as always, was turning the dream into wood, cement, and hammer blows. The scaffolding was improvised, made from reused planks and thick ropes. No modern tools, no professional support, just muscle, instinct, and faith. He had already climbed up and down dozens of times that day. Maria watched him from the shop's doorway, part of her worried, part of her admiring his skill. Customers came and went. Children ran down the street, and the sound of the hammer blended with laughter, rustling bags and snippets of conversation. It seemed like just another ordinary day. Until the silence came. It wasn't a scream. It wasn't commotion. It was the dull crack of breaking wood and a body hitting the ground, followed by the kind of silence that seems to stop time. The scaffolding gave way with a snap that still echoed in the ears of those who saw it. Ika fell on his back, striking his shoulder and head on the packed earth before he could protect himself. Maria dropped everything. She ran as if her heart had leaped out of her chest. She shouted his name, but it was as if the world had gone deaf. Some neighbors came closer. Others only peered from their windows. One or two offered help, but most just watched. With that mix of fear, curiosity, and judgment that only appears in other people's tragedies, Aiko was conscious, but couldn't move. His eyes searched for hers as if to say, "Hold me." Even without words, Maria knelt beside him, cradled his head in her lap, and murmured quiet prayers, begging for protection, pleading that it wasn't serious. Someone ran to fetch the village healer. Others went to get a cart to take him to the nearest clinic in the hours that followed. The shop's doors stayed shut. For days, Maria didn't think about selling, sewing, or smiling. She spent her nights sitting beside the hammock where he rested, placing cool compresses, spooning him water, shifting his body with the care of someone afraid to break what was already wounded. Aiko, even in pain and struggling to speak, would whisper whenever he could, "It'll pass. Don't let go of my hand." And she didn't. Not for a second. Rumors spread. Some said he'd never walk again. Others said the shop would fail now. There were those who muttered it was punishment, that they had been getting too full of themselves. But no one expected what happened next. When a week later, Maria reopened the shop, the silence returned, but this time it was different. A respectful, uneasy silence. The women who used to pass by laughing now entered with their heads bowed. They bought soap, coffee, flour, but spoke little, handing over coins without meeting her eyes. It was as if suffering had finally made them. See, some began helping without calling it help. One brought milk, another offered firewood. A third sent a good piece of cloth for sewing. And Maria, even without asking, accepted it all with a nod, storing in her heart the quiet miracle of watching other people's hearts open through pain. It took weeks for Aiko to walk again, but when he took his first steps, still uneven, still slow, he went to the front of the shop and with a trembling hand picked up a shovel leaning against the wall. Maria rushed to stop him, but he smiled, "Even if it's just to hold the shovel, I want to be here with you." And there he stayed, shovel in hand, seated on a makeshift bench, greeting customers as if to say, "We're still standing, even if it still hurts inside." That day, when a neighbor came in and asked for 3 loaves of bread, Maria handed them over with care. The woman hesitated, looked at Aiko and murmured, "God bless you both. We never know how much pain can bring hearts closer." It was the first time anyone in the village had openly acknowledged without mockery that this couple was made of something stronger than looks, gossip, or judgment. And so through pain and silence, the village began to see there was something in Maria's house that no fall could bring down. The foundation of true love, and love like that, even when it falls, rises stronger. Over time, the once crooked walls of the shop grew stronger. Aiko recovered from the fall, returned to work with even more care. Like someone who understands that the body's fragility does nothing to weaken the purpose. It was no longer just a little corner shop. It had become a landmark. People from other villages would pass by to buy soap, order sewing, or simply sit and have a coffee while resting from the walk. Maria began waking earlier, sleeping later. She swed through the night, baked bread before the rooster crowed, and served customers with the smile of someone carrying fatigue on her back, but faith in her heart. She no longer kept track of credit only in the blue notebook. Now she had a file sorted by name, by day, by amount, not out of suspicion but out of respect, to show that even those who couldn't pay right away had value, and were treated as customers, not charity cases. It was on late afternoon, the sky the color of wet clay, when Aiko walked into the shop carrying a painted piece of wood. Maria was folding cloth, her back bent, her face damp with sweat. He said nothing. He simply placed the board at the front of the shop and pointed. Maria looked. Letters painted by hand were crooked, but there was a tenderness in them no fine brush could give. It read, "Maria's house where no one leaves empty-handed." She put her hand to her mouth. She didn't say anything for a long few seconds. She just sat on the doorstep and cried. Cried like someone who had waited a lifetime for recognition that had never come from family, neighbors, or friends, but was now there, hanging above the entrance for everyone to see. It wasn't ICO's shop nor village grocery. It was Maria's house, the woman who had always been invisible, who had always been told she was too much to be loved, too much to dream, too much to dream, too much to have worth, now had her name carved as the pillar of the place she had built with her own hands. And more than that, with her heart, some of the old mockers began to return. At first they came with their heads low, saying they were just looking. Later they asked for credit, and Maria, as always, didn't refuse. She handed over the goods with the same care, wrote down the name, the amount, and said, "Pay when you can." Here, noon leaves empty. dash-handed. Dot. It wasn't revenge. It was justice with dignity. The children of the women who once mocked her now came to help deliver bread. A young man who had once laughed at her in the market now hauled goods for her. And every time he passed with the cart full, he greeted her with a good afternoon. Donna Maria, a mix of respect and regret. The shop grew quietly. No need for ads, bright signs, or loud music. It grew on the foundation of trust, on the strength of a name that had once been the punchline of a joke and was now a symbol of welcome. Once, a lady from the city visiting her sister in the village stepped into the shop and said, "This place smells like childhood, like Grandma's house." Maria smiled because that's what she had wanted from the start. Not just to sell products, but to offer memory, comfort, a place for a weary soul to rest. The sign gathered color over time. One day, Akil drew a heart beside her name. Another day, a young woman rejected by her family wrote, "Here." I felt human, and when people asked Maria why she had put her name on the sign, she answered, simply, "Because it was the first time someone believed I could have a house with my name on the door." The phrase spread like a blessing. And in the village where she had once been only the fat seamstress, she was now Donna Maria from the shop. Maria of the warm bread, Maria who helps without asking. And that more than any public recognition was the silent victory of someone who had never stopped building, even when everyone said she didn't fit into other people's dreams. Now she was the one dreaming, and others little by little were learning to dream with her because the shop, despite its clay walls and crate shelves, was already the biggest in the region. Not in size, but in respect, in truth, in love, and all of it was anchored to a name, the name of someone who was once avoided and who now no one forgets. The shop was now known throughout the entire region. People walked from distant villages just to breathe in the smell of Maria's coffee, hear a bit of wise advice, or take home a bar of handmade soap. But what drew people in the most wasn't the products, it was the atmosphere. It was as if upon crossing the wooden doorway with its crooked painted letters, reading Maria's house, where no one leaves empty, and yet people could set down the weight of the world's judgments and find a place where a tired soul could breathe. It was on an ordinary afternoon, the sun warming people's shoulders and the shop's line snaking all the way to the tree out front that the scene happened. A young woman, broad-bodied with full cheeks and eyes, always cast downward, approached for the first time. She wore a simple dress, the fabric a little tight around her hips, and walked in short steps, as if apologizing for existing. Behind her, two girls laughed loud, shameless, without even trying to hide their scorn. "Look at that. Another one who must think this is an all-you-can-eat buffet," sighed Doan. "She's going to want credit and try to pay with her body," added the other, bursting into laughter. The line went silent. Some pretended not to hear, others chuckled nervously, and a few stepped back as if the problem might be contagious. The heavy-set young woman froze on the sidewalk. Her eyes began to brim. She looked toward the shop as one looked toward the sky on a stormy day. She wanted to go in, but her body trembled. She turned to leave. That's when the door swung open. Maria stepped out, dishcloth still in her hands, feet planted firmly on the packed earth, eyes burning with a fury that didn't come from hate, but from an old pain, one she knew far too well herself. She looked straight at the two mockers. She didn't yell, she didn't insult, but she spoke with a firmness that even the wind seemed to stop to hear. The same mouth that mocks today may need bread tomorrow. The girl's eyes widened in embarrassment. One gave a nervous giggle. The other looked away. Maria went on. "I've been that girl. I've been looked over from head to toe as if I were too much, as if my body should apologize for being in the world. I've heard laughter like yours, and yet here I am with my name on the door, with respect at the counter, and with a heart open even to those who haven't yet learned to hold back their cruelty." The silence that followed was like lightning splitting a clear sky. The two girls stepped back, one muttering a rushed apology before they both slipped away. Maria then turned to the young woman. She held out her hand, not just in gesture, but in gaze. The woman hesitated for a second, then stepped inside. "What's your name?" Maria asked. "Naomi," she replied almost in a whisper. "Naomi, what are you hungry for today?" Maria asked with a smile. "Respect," said the young woman, her voice tight. Maria said nothing more. She simply pointed to the chair near the counter, poured a cup of coffee, and set a still warm slice of cake beside it. Naomi stayed. The next day she came back. By the end of the week she was already helping organize crates. A month later she was selling couscous with joy, greeting customers by name. In no time she became part of the shop, part of the family. She began calling Maria Aunt, and when someone asked who the new girl was, Maria would answer, "She's the daughter of respect, planted in pain, but watered with dignity." The scene stayed etched in the village's memory, because there once again Maria proved her shop didn't just sell goods. It sold fresh starts. It sold hope. It was a place where with a look and a gesture, She taught that no one should be judged by body, by weight, or by appearance. And if one day Maria's house became the biggest shop in the region, it wasn't because of its size. It was because there, behind a simple wooden door, an empire of welcome had been born. A place where the greatest currency was humanity. And Maria, the woman once mocked for being too big to be loved, was now the one who loved without measure, and that no one could ever mock. The woman who had once been called dead weight by her own aunts, who used to walk through the village with hair eyes on the ground, and her soul shrunk by other people's laughter, had become the foundation of a place where many found the strength to stand tall. Maria, the one who for so long had known only closed doors and thinly veiled. Judgment was now the name painted on the most respected storefront in the region, not because she chased it, but because she persisted. Because even while carrying the pain of being rejected by those who should have loved her, she never let bitterness define her. And the man who had once been just a quiet bricklayer, bent over the weight of cement and the silences of the world, was the first to see in her what no one else did. Not magazine beauty, nor a body for desire, but courage, capability, truth. Aiko never needed to say much. His actions spoke with the firmness of a well-driven nail. He built not just the shop, but Maria's sense of safety. He was her wall against mockery, her ground when the world tried to collapse. Together, they built something no money could buy. A reputation made of respect, a daily life made of partnership, and a home made of dignity. The shop grew, yes, but the greatest construction was invisible. The way they turned rejection into welcome, scorn into kindness, pain into service. Maria's house became a landmark. But more than that, it became a mirror where so many other women, silenced for years, could finally see themselves. And in seeing themselves, remember that there is still time, that there is still worth, that it is still possible to be loved even after being ignored for so long. One afternoon, a young journalist from a nearby city showed up, curious about the buzz surrounding the fat woman in the bricklayer shop. He wanted to understand what was so special about it. He asked Maria, "How did all of this begin?" She paused for a moment, glanced at the wall where the first photos of the shop still hung crooked shelves, dirt floors. Then she looked at Aiko, fixing the gate with his usual patience, and she replied with a serene smile, the kind of smile of someone who no longer needs to prove anything to anyone. It began with a compliment and a brick, and in that moment the journalist understood, because sometimes all a person needs is someone who sees beyond what ordinary eyes perceive. Someone who looks with tenderness, who believes before the world approves, who says even without saying you deserve this. That's what Aiko did. And that's what Maria gave back to the world in the form of a shop, a home, a legacy. Maria's house still stands there with its doors open. It's not just a business. It's a place where the soul rests, where the body is welcomed, where the past does not dictate worth. A place where no one, absolutely no one, leaves empty-handed nor empty-hearted. And that's why even today anyone who steps inside for the first time feels in the air something that can't be sold, bought, or borrowed. The presence of a love that overcame mockery, a love that doesn't shout but builds brick by brick, truth by truth. And so this story ends. Or perhaps it begins again every time a woman hears it and whispers to herself, "If she made it, maybe I can too." If this story touched your heart, let us know where you're watching from. Leave a comment below. We'd love to hear from you. Don't forget to like the video, share it with your friends and family, and subscribe to the channel. That really helps us keep bringing you real and emotional stories like this one. Thank you for being part of our